great to see some of these cars coming back out. The Capris as well. They were just before the Sierras. Volvo. I think we've only got the one Volvo in this one, haven't we? Phil Perryman.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
And there we've also got an American machine as well. That was the Ford Mustang. Fred Bill Shepherd. They've got the Mustang. XJS Jaguar there. Tom Walkinshaw days. Heading out. Then the Minis as well, because they've always been a huge part of touring cars, and they're sort of in the old days. And you had classes, and of course quite often the champions were not the people who were winning the races outright. They were the people that kept winning their particular class. So you might have some super fast car up front, but it's not going to be winning the championship, because further down the order there's a class car that will do it instead. So all fun and games.
One of the last to do that was John Cleland.
Yes.
I remember winning the British Touring Car Championship in a Class C, I think it was, Astra, when the top cars winning the races were all taking points off each other. So
yeah, and they were Sierras, weren't they?
That's right. Yeah,
that was when the Sierras were up against them. But you're absolutely right. He won in an Astra GTE. So that was back in 1989 that he did that. But it was after that. It's basically soon after that it became one class.
That's right.
Touring cars.
Yeah. And it's remained. They've changed the specifications, but it's changed. It's remained the same ever since.
It does make it easier in a way. When it's a class system, I understand it, and certainly looking back over the years, there was some wonderful battles in each class. You know, so some years you had tremendous battles and worthy champions at the end of it. But it does get a bit more confusing when you're watching it on telly, knowing that the winner of the championship's actually about 12th overall.
Yeah. Yes. And we should have sharing a Sierra Cosworth RS 500, the man that is regularly called the greatest touring car driver ever, and that's Steve Soper. Certainly he's up there with the greatest 3 or 4 touring car drivers. Steve Soper sharing with Craig Davis in the RS 500. And we've also got James Hunt's son, Freddie, in racing as well, sharing one of the Nissan Skyline GTRs known as Godzilla. Because the Australians said they come from Japan and they're monsters.
Yeah, well, you can see a BMW M3 just going through there as well. So you need to see this mixture of different cars that we've got out in this historic touring car challenge. There comes the Rover ST1, a big group of cars. We've got a VW Scirocco in there as well. BMW M3 doing the chase in the original livery, and it really looks fabulous. Oh, a lot of smoke coming from the number 10 Sierra. That's the Julian Thomas Callum Lockie car. I don't know if that was just, I don't think it was just spray. It might have been. You can see when some people are offline, there is still a lot of spray being kicked up, but I don't know, it looks really more smoky than spray to me. We'll see, hopefully it'll carry on. There's the number 48 Mini. James and Chris Snowden's car. They're in a slightly different class. And that's the number 82. That's the Harvey and Rupert Death car, the Mini Cooper S, the 1275cc.
Chasing one of the Ford Lotus Cortinas, the number 11 car of Henry Mann and Desmond Smale. And Henry Mann is the son of Alan Mann, who ran the team that always turned out their cars in the red with the gold roof. Racing works for the team for many years in touring car racing and sports cars.
First few cars beginning to cross the line, so we're going to see a few changes coming up as the first laps are being set. Again, it's not a particularly long session, so they've got to get on with it, get those laps in as quickly as possible. David Tomlin has just set the pace in his Sierra. For now, you can see seeing a lot of changes to that. There's the BMW M3, number 101. That's David and Rory Cuff sharing that car. That is a 1989 machine. Looks really beautiful in its BMW livery. Of course, BMW had a pretty good time. Frank Sitner won the Touring Car Championship in a BMW M3 back in 1988. And then later on, when touring cars kind of moved on a bit, Marcus Winkelhock, of course, took the victory. Helped by Steve Soper to a certain extent, but Steve didn't do the whole campaign quite the same way. And he was second. Paul Radicic was third. That was 1993. But as I say, this E30 M3 was very successful in the late 80s.
In rallying as well. Another
Yeah.
car like the Escort that could be used in both. And ProDrive ran the British cars and in rallying as well with drivers like Mark Duez.
Yeah, fabulous machine.
It is wonderful. And really built the reputation, along with the earlier BMW racing cars, built the reputation of BMW as being very, very sporty saloon cars.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of picked up that to another level. A very good friend of mine bought one back in the day, and it was such a thing to have. And of course, they held their value and have held their value remarkably over the years. So yeah, that's the BMW. Fastest at the moment, though, still Tomlin in the RS500 Sierra, number 117, being chased. There's another Capri there, that's a number 70 car, and that's Marcus Jewell's car, and Ben Klukas. Now, Ben Klukas is a quick driver. He's sharing that number 70 Capri, so he will deliver some pretty impressive laps, I would think. Klukas experienced in all forms of motorsport, started out in Formula Ford, sports cars, etc. The M3 is what we're watching right now. 9th fastest so far. 10th fastest, by the way, is the car that Steve Silver's sharing. Steve's in it. Craig Davis is sharing a Cosworth. Sierra Cosworth.
Yeah, Craig's a pretty handy driver as well, so it's likely that they'll both be reasonably quick. And the RS500, I think you could almost say, not in the wet necessarily, but almost made for Silverstone, because the fast, open, sweeping corners and the power of the Sierra Cosworth takes you back to the days when there were whole bunches of them racing together. And here is one of those Nissan Skylines, known as the Godzilla, which that's Simon Garrett's car, number 37, in the black and red colours, and they absolutely dominated in the very late 80s, early 90s. 29 wins from 29 races in the Japanese Touring Car Championship.
Wow.
And then they went to Australia and beat everybody, including the Sierra Cosworths. Won the Bathurst 1000 in 91 and 92. And as I say, the Australians were rather miffed about that, so they called it the Godzilla because it was just a beast, a monster.
Yeah.
And there are 3 of them entered in this race.
Good stuff. Right, lovely to be able to enjoy seeing them. See how that continues. There's Lotus Cortina, slightly different level, of course, and the cars are sliding around. There's that beautiful BMW CSL. As we now look at the man who is fastest so far, it's the number 117 of David Tomlin, and I don't think he's sharing the car this weekend. It's just him on his own, and he's showing some very good pace. The number 60 car, Mark Wright, Dave Coyne, has popped up in a second. That's another Sierra Cosworth. So the Sierra Cosworths are working very effectively around here. The Nissan in 3rd place is that of Simon Garrard. So 3rd place, no, he's just been pushed down to 4th position, in fact, because moving up has gone the Paul Mensley, Matthew Ellis Sierra. So another Sierra pops up there. It is funny, actually, when you think about how much they raced, but it was only Rob Gravitt, I think, that actually won the title outright in a Sierra, wasn't it? Andy Rouse raced them a lot, but with that class system, it didn't always work out. He won the Touring Car Championship many times, of course, Andy. Yes, the Sierra didn't win the championship as such so many times.
They're taking points off each other, because we've actually, I think we've got 2 of the Rouse Sierras here this weekend, and we've seen one of them already on screen, the Caliber coloured car, and very, very successful. They also raced in Europe as well, and rather more successfully in terms of winning championships with the Eggenberger team, with Steve Soper driving as well, and very successful in the Spa 24 Hours.
Look at this beautiful Mark 1 Escort, absolutely stunning. Bit of aerodynamic help with a little sort of spoiler on the front end. Lovely blue and white livery, and it's a real joy to watch. Interesting, you said you had a Mark 1. I briefly had a Mark 1 at Escort as well. Did a sprint with it at Goodwood, in my early days, and sadly the engine seized while it was going round, but let's hope nobody has those sort of problems. There we are back with the number 10 Sierra Cosworth. We were looking at this earlier. This is the Julian Thomas and Callum Lockie car, very much an original scheme as well.
And that's an original car. That was the Andy Rouse, Guy Edwards entry in the championship, and that's the owner, Callum Lockie, at the wheel. Sorry, the owner, Julian Thomas, at the wheel. And I mentioned earlier, Callum has been coaching Julian for some years now, and he's really turned out to be a very, very good driver indeed, so that will be a contender.
There's the Nissan Skyline, which is fourth fastest currently, the number 37 car of Simon Garrard. Very competitive so far. They're just going past one of those Lotus Cortinas. That's the 11 car of Henry Mann, actually running in a slightly different category. Neil Brown also competing in a Ford Lotus Cortina in this event. He builds engines, has done for many, many years. The Brown race engines, very impressive. An Alfa just being passed as well. The 14 Alfa Romeo GTV6 of Paul Clayson. Always a pretty machine to see out there. So Simon Garrard still fourth fastest, but the number one at this stage is David Tomlin in the Sierra 500. We've still got 15 minutes to go, but remember they are sharing drivers quite often in this in this race. Not everybody is sharing their car, but quite a few are, so there's got to be time in this session to do a quick driver swap, so they both get to do at least 3 laps.
Focusing on this Nissan Skyline, which, as I mentioned earlier, really dominated for quite a few years, 4 years in touring car racing, and actually brought about, in part, the change in the regulations, because it was so dominant that they decided just to rewrite the regulations, and then it wasn't eligible anymore.
Sometimes it's the only way, isn't it, to change something. So you think of what's happening in Formula One going into the future. Yes, maybe that will change who's up there and who isn't. Another of the Alphas just being passed by the Nissan Skyline. But you can see it really has great pace, doesn't it? Both in the corners and in a straight line. It's got lots of horsepower, puts the power down well, comes across the line. He's still fourth fastest at this stage. Hasn't been a change really amongst the top few cars so far. That Paul Mensley, Matthew Ellis Sierra still in second place. There are a few pit stops going on, of course, because drivers are changing at this point. So that will make a difference. We might see one or two of the quick drivers pushing their cars further up the grid.
That's Neil Brown we're looking at from the back there in his Mark 1 Cortina, the Lotus Cortina, which really preceded the Mark 1 Escort as a competition car. Ford said they wanted something to be able to go racing, and because win on Sunday, sell on Monday is what they used to say, and they went to Colin Chapman and said, we need you to breathe on our Mark 1 Cortina and make it a bit quicker. So it's got a different engine to what you would have had if you owned one of these as a family car, and a different suspension geometry as well, as we do see what looks like an engine or turbo blow up somewhere, and there's so much smoke. I wonder.
Hopefully it's not that one.
That's the number 10 Julian Thomas Callum Lockie car, but somebody had pushed out. That's another of the original Sierra Cosworths. That's the Craig Davis Steve Soper car, originally raced in period by Chris Hodgetts in the British Touring Car Championship.
And he did go on to win the championship, but not in this one. He had already won it, I think, before he broke the Sierra, but he won it in the Toyota Corolla. Let's just have a look. I think we may have a chance to have a look at a bit more of that smoke. It's actually from the Volvo. That's surprising. That's the Phil Perryman Volvo 242. It is a turbocharged car.
Yeah, that's turbo gone, isn't it, with the amount of smoke that's coming out of it.
Yeah, that is a pity. Let's hope that they fixing that might be a bit of a tall order for the race weekend. That's a great shame, because it is, I think, the only Volvo entered into this.
A quick glimpse there of the Jaguar XJS. There's the Volvo being pushed back by the marshals. That's a heavy piece of metal they're pushing there. But we got a quick shot of the Jaguar XJS, which we rarely see out racing these days, and quite how it ever was classed as a saloon car, I'm not really sure, but then it was built by Tom Walkinshaw,
Yes.
who was very good at reading the regulations.
Yes, or maybe twisting them slightly sometimes as well, as we know. But yeah, a great motorsports individual, put so much into the sport and took quite a lot out of it too in many ways. So yeah, good mix of cars. Still no change up front. Tomlin car has come into the pits for the moment, but has set the pace on a 2:25, and is about a second quicker than anybody else. There's the number 60 Sierra. That's the Mark Wright, Dave Coyne car. Dave Coyne, a brilliant Formula Ford racer back in his day. I remember watching him win at the festival, but always competitive. Rode for Van Diemen originally, and Swift as well. Fantastic racer, and good to see him. He'll be competing in the Sierra Cosworth this weekend.
And the rain is really coming down very heavily now, so that with 10 minutes still to go in the session, that may affect the times.
Yes, it may well do. I don't think anybody's going to be able to improve very much as the track gets more and more slippery, so we may only see a few laps being taken just to get a bit of experience as much as anything. Quite a modified Capri there, one of the earlier modified Capris. That's the Richard Kent Chris Ward car. That's a Broadspeed Capri.
That's right, that one was built by, well, one of two actually, built by Broadspeed for Ford in 1973. And that originally had a 3-litre engine, but it's now been upgraded to a later 3.4-litre, or was in period, in 1975. And, that was really designed to beat the BMWs. It was Ford versus BMW in touring car racing at the time in Europe.
It's really nice having a touring car historic race like this that we're going to enjoy over the weekend, with some of these fabulous classic cars together. You know, we've seen them in period, but you wouldn't have really seen a Capri, especially an early Mark 1 Capri, up against the Sierra Cosworth. I know the Sierra's got the advantage, but it's just lovely to see them all out on the same piece of track together, isn't it?
Actually, I question whether the Capri might be as quick as the Sierra, because it was from the time the regulations were much freer.
That's true.
It's got a 3.4. That's another example of a similar car, Steve Dance's Capri.
Yeah, he's 7th quickest at the moment, so you're right. Yeah, they're not that far off, are they?
They are tremendous pieces of engineering. They really are, and they are very heavily modified, whereas the era of the Sierra Cosworth, the cars were much more road standard, with breathed on for racing, but these were out-and-out race cars.
That's a very good point. Yeah, so we do actually get some good battles between cars of quite different ages, thanks to the rules changes over the years. So Steve Dance, 7th fastest in this beautiful Capri, and looks like he's heading back into the pits now. But as I say, the lap times are looking slower now. I mean, for example, let's just have a look. A lot of the front runners are actually back in the pits now. Just have a quick look at the number 42 Rover, Chris and Charles Williams sharing that Rover. But the lap times are dropping away, as you can imagine, in these wetter conditions. The minis will go well in the wet, I'm sure. Yes, they always go well. We've got a classic mini race as well, which is purely for minis this weekend. But we've also got some minis in this race in a particular class, the 2TC touring car class. Graham Churchill, Neil McFadden, they're racing minis here. Harvey and Rupert Death, they're both racing minis. And James and Chris Snow. So we'll get them fighting their way with some of the more powerful machinery, I'm sure.
Graham Churchill in the 115 Mini there, he's been racing minis for as long as I can remember, 40 odd, maybe longer years. He's not a spring chicken these days, but very competitive. Often shares with another mini stalwart, Peter but Peter not sharing with him this weekend.
Still a shame that Peter isn't here. We've got some other great mini drivers coming out in the classic mini race later on, of course. So we'll see some qualifying from them. So number 6, this is the the Chevrolet Camaro of John and Jack Young. 5.7 litre, so this is a good potent machine. It's from 1973. He could probably want a bit of a drier track with that machine.
Yes, I would imagine so. And that's another car which was relatively dominant in period. In its time, Stuart Graham was a great driver in the Camaro, and in fact James Hunt won a Tour of Britain in a Camaro with Robert Furnell, didn't he?
That's right,
Robert Furnell, the journalist, and later at Donington. They were competitive cars at the time. And often what happened was the regulations were written, and then they'd look at what cars were available and say, well, that one will be quick.
Yeah, no, it's great. Really good to see. Father and son combination, John and Jack, in that car. We've got a few father and son combinations in this event, actually, which is nice to see. A little bit of a lap improvement there for the number 4 car, despite the conditions being bad. That's it's probably because Miles Griffiths has just jumped into it. We've seen Miles going quick in various other cars already today.
I think they fitted an outboard motor to it. That's why it's gone a bit
is that
quicker.
What it is? Yeah. It really is wet out there now, isn't it? Look at the track. We've still got rain hitting our windows here in the commentary box at Abbey, and I was hoping that we were going to get a bit of a drier time, but it's looking very, very damp out there at the moment. If you're tucked up in one of the covered grandstands, you're in a good place to watch from. So hope you're enjoying the qualifying that we are watching at the moment. If you're back at home watching us streaming online, and that's another good way of staying dry and enjoying some of the famous racing cars that we can look forward to seeing as we go door to door over the course of this racing weekend at Silverstone. 5 minutes, just over 5 minutes to go in the qualifying session for the Historic Touring Car Challenge, and the Sierras are looking very, very strong, there's no doubt about it. There's still a lovely blend, a lovely mix, another Escort on the cameras at the moment. Nick and Harry Whale, in fact, they're sharing that car. And then the Alpha, the number 34 of Jeff Gordon, Alpha Sprint Veloce. Oh, we've got a spinner there. That's the other Alfa Romeo that we saw earlier, the green and white one. Thankfully, I think... Oh, there's another car off up there. I haven't seen that before. The rain is really falling down hard now, and there's a lot of standing water. I think aquaplaning is becoming a thing. I mean, probably sensible to bring the car in, to be honest, now.
That Mustang we're looking at now is the Shepherds. That's another father and son pairing. The Shepherds in a Mustang. That's an ex-Richard Lloyd car from the British Saloon Car Championship, as it was previously called before it became touring car, and that raced also in the 1974 Tour of Britain, which I mentioned. And there's the XJS, which is an original car. It's not a recreation. That car was built by Tom Walkinshaw Racing for the European Touring Car Championship, and it was driven on various occasions by Wyn Percy, Martin Brundle, Tom Walkinshaw and Jeff Allen, all greats of racing over the years. And in fact Tom Walkinshaw won the Macau race in 1984 around the Principality, and it also took part at Bathurst as well. And we've got a red flag, Ben.
Yeah, it's no surprise. We've had a couple of cars go off. The conditions have got really quite horrible out there, and it's quite understandable that they have brought out the red flag. So I think it's unlikely that this session will be restarted. I think that will be it for this session, and it's not going to make life too easy for the remaining sessions that are still to come up before the lunch break. Not ideal at all, but for the touring cars, they can probably cope with it. I hope you can see the misting up. Look at the screen on that Sierra, for example, and a lot of them will be having that. It's always an issue in a touring car on a rather damp, cold day like this. You get this misting up of the screen, and that's really horrible. You just so difficult to see where you're going. It's bad enough in a single seater, but the misting up on the screen does make life tricky, and you can see a few of them are doing that. You can treat the screens with some special stuff to help avoid it, but quite tricky. You see, you can barely look into some of these cars. It must be very difficult to look out.
Some were fitted with heated windscreens, weren't they, to try and get round this. The long distance cars particularly,
yes,
where wet conditions were likely, as they make their way down the pit lane.
Well, that is a shame for them that the weather just has gone against them a little bit, and it's still raining pretty hard out there at the moment. So that has brought that session, I think, pretty much to a premature close. We haven't had total confirmation they won't restart it, but I very much doubt that they will restart that session. And Mini's still making its way back round, number 82 car. We are expecting to see next out the E-Type Challenge, actually. It's qualifying for the 60th anniversary E-Type Challenge, so they're going to be sliding around in the wet, aren't they? It's not going to be too easy either. But let's just see, let's hope all these guys get back and that they can clear away some of those cars that have ended up spun off and on the grass. You can see that Lotus Cortina in the background having a big slide, even though they're all going to take it fairly steady now.